ただいまよりセッション
Now we would like to start Session 2, Scientific Aspects of Dementia Prevention and Care. The chairperson of this session are Professor Takao Suzuki from NCGG and also Professor Martin Prince from King's College London Institute of Psychiatry. This session will go on until 3 o'clock. Now I would like to pass the microphone to the chairpersons.
Gentlemen, it's just time to start the afternoon session number 2. And I'm Takao Suzuki, coming from the Research Institute of National Center for Geriatrics and Gerontology, a co-chair of this session with another co-chair, Professor Martin Prince from the King's College London Institute of Psychiatry. And it's a great pleasure to be the chairs of this session. And I'll have opening remarks from now, and Professor Prince will give closing remarks in the end of this session. In this session, with the title of Scientific Aspects of Dementia Prevention and Care, we will have 9 distinguished speakers from G7 countries and from a couple of Asian countries where the dementia becomes very serious public health problems. Each speakers have focusing on the evidence-based aspect on the dementia prevention and care. So this research field has traditionally relied heavily upon experience. In this session, we can share the latest and advanced scientific knowledge accumulated from various and well-designed studies around the world. Also, we can learn each other for possible policy activities and direction of the future research on these topics, on this issue. Finally, I'd like to remind you that the time allocated for this session is very limited, only 2 hours, 120 minutes. So each speaker have only 12 minutes presentation, including the minimum question and discussions. And after all presentation, we ask Professor Hachinsky to give us a comprehensive comments on this session. So now I'd like to start the first speaker, Professor Prince from UK. Could you please?
So thank you very much indeed, Dr. Suzuki, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here to talk to you about global prevalence of dementia and prevention strategy. And I think part of the basis for this presentation and something that I want to introduce to you is the 2014 World Alzheimer Report, released just a couple of months ago, the results of which, I think there's a few copies here at the meeting, but the report in full can be downloaded from Alzheimer's Disease International's website at www.alz.co.uk. And this work is part of a series of reports that we've worked on for Alzheimer's Disease International and also with WHO as part of something that we've called the Global Observatory for Aging and Dementia Care, established at King's College London with support from Alzheimer's Disease International. In 2009, we reported on the global prevalence of dementia. In 2010, on the global societal economic costs. In 2011, on the benefits of early diagnosis and intervention. 2012, a summary report with implications for policy with World Health Organization. In 2013, on long-term care for dementia, we produced a report for G8 heads of government prior to the summit that initiated these legacy events on the changing prevalence of dementia. And the most recent reports, including the 2014 report, were sponsored by BUPA. So, first of all, why is risk reduction for dementia so crucially important? And I think this is relevant when we look at the numbers and we see the rates of increase in these numbers that we project from 2015 this year through to 2050. And we can see, looking at these numbers and their geographic distribution, that already in 2015, in fact, there's a preponderance of people with dementia worldwide living in the less developed south compared with the richer northern countries. We can see that 19 million of the total population of 47 million with dementia actually live in South and Southeast Asia. But if we scroll forward and look at the increases of these numbers, and if you look at that South Asian bar, and you also look at Latin America and Africa, you can see that the increase in countries in the north is particularly striking, in the south rather, is particularly striking. We're actually looking at a threefold increase in Asia, but a fourfold increase in numbers in Africa and Latin America, compared with a twofold increase in Europe and North America and other northern regions. And these projected increases in the numbers of people with dementia are predicated on an assumption that age-specific prevalence does not change, and that these are driven entirely by population aging. But of course, prevalence is determined by incidence and survival with dementia. And if incidence changes, then we might be looking at a different pattern to the future epidemic. So it's by reducing the incidence of dementia that we have a chance to do something now to make an impact on what would otherwise be very worrying numbers in terms of increase in the future. But again, if we look at the pattern of global incidence, 7.7 million new cases every year, or one new case every 4 seconds, nearly half of all of those incident cases of dementia are occurring in one continent in Asia. So we need to bear in mind, and this has been a main focus of these World Alzheimer reports, that dementia is truly a global condition, and we need not to forget low and middle income countries in our deliberations. So what do we do in the 2014 World Alzheimer Report on modifiable risk factors for dementia? I must admit that when I started this work, I thought this is going to be a very easy year. In terms of synthesizing all of the available evidence, we just need to look at all of the many reports that have already been published, all of the authoritative systematic reviews, and we will find some clear answers about what are the modifiable risk factors. Then we started to do the work, then we noticed a lot of problems. The first thing is, just because A is associated with B, it doesn't mean that A causes B. And it was very apparent that a lot of the systematic reviews had not been adequately critical. They hadn't looked at the alternative explanations that chance, bias, confounding, or reverse causality, dementia leading to the risk exposure rather than the risk exposure leading to dementia, may have accounted for the association. We looked at all different types of studies in order to give us evidence. Cohort studies, in particular long-term cohort studies over 20 or 30 years, can give us good information that removes the possibility of reverse causality. Randomized controlled trials are best to limit confounding, but there are very few examples of those, and those aren't really feasible for the very long-term period of analysis that would be necessary to look at associations like midlife hypertension, for example, and risk for dementia. Systematic reviews can help us get an idea of the consistency of associations, and biological studies are important to give us clues about plausible mechanisms for an association. It was also important to take a life course perspective. And I think when I started work on the etiology of dementia in the 1990s, people pretty much thought dementia happens when people are old, therefore it's important to look at things that might have happened a few years before they developed dementia in order to understand who gets dementia and who doesn't. Then people began to think, well, actually, Alzheimer's disease, the pathology, starts 30 years before the onset of dementia. So perhaps things that happen in midlife might influence your risk. Then people began to get interested in brain development and the concept of cognitive and brain reserve, and the notion that factors like education and nutrition and development in early life might actually also confer a protective element. So it's very important to have this life course perspective. Also, long-term cohort studies have shown us that things get very complicated when you start to look at the life course relationship between risk factors and dementia onset. This graph shows the relationship between body mass index and the onset of dementia in the Honolulu Asia Aging study, but I could have shown you the same graph for hypertension or for cholesterol. So what happens for body mass index is that if you look at the situation in late life when people are developing dementia, those that have dementia have a lower body mass index than those that do not have dementia. And that relationship actually holds 10 to 15 years before the onset of dementia. But if you scroll back to midlife, you find that the people that are going to develop dementia actually had somewhat higher body mass indices than those that did not go on to develop dementia in late life. So therefore, to understand the relationship of some of these cardiometabolic risk factors, you really need long-term cohort studies in order to determine this. So what did we do? We decided what the scope of the review was going to be. We appointed review groups. We identified all of the systematic reviews. We read all of the papers in the systematic reviews. And that turned out to be critically important because we discovered when we started to look that a lot of these systematic reviews were really of very poor quality. So the inclusion and exclusion criteria were questionable. They were not adequately applied often. The results in the reviews, often the data that was extracted from the papers was incorrect. Some of the papers only had occasional errors. Many of them were absolutely littered with errors, and the conclusions of the reviews were simply not tenable based on the evidence that was applied. So we actually ended up doing a lot of our own systematic reviews simply because the quality of the data and the evidence that was available was not strong enough. We looked at 4 main domains and again arranged these in a life course way. So developmental and early life factors, including, for example, education, psychological factors, including depression, anxiety, and personality factors as a proxy for stress. Lifestyle factors, including alcohol consumption and smoking, exercise, and cognitive activity. And then cardiovascular risk factors, principally obesity, lipids, hypertension, and smoking. So what were the key findings from this review process? And I'm going to illustrate some of the things that we found just by giving you a couple of examples of the systematic reviews that we conducted. So here is one on the effect of depression on the risk of incident dementia. And you can see that there's a lot of cohort studies, 26 of them. And you can see that meta-analysing the results, there's a twofold increased risk of the incidence of dementia associated with depression. But you can also see that there's a lot of heterogeneity in these results just by looking at that plot. 78% heterogeneity. So heterogeneity varies between 0 and 100%. 0 is no heterogeneity beyond chance. So although there seems to be a very clear finding, it's not so clear because of the degree of heterogeneity. Now, how can we understand that heterogeneity? If we array the effect sizes according to the duration of follow-up, you find that the longer the follow-up period, the smaller the effect size for the association. So the positive association between depression and incident dementia is only seen in studies with a short follow-up period. So really, it's much more likely that this association is accounted for by reverse causality, that depression is the part of the prodrome of dementia, rather than depression actually being causal. Here we see another meta-analysis, which is the association between diabetes in late life and the incidence of any dementia. And again, you see a substantial and robust effect size, 1.5 times increased risk, but the heterogeneity in this case is 0%. We had to exclude a number of studies that were somewhat biased because they were based on clinical diagnoses of diabetes and dementia from the same service. And obviously, people with a diagnosis of diabetes would be more closely monitored and so more likely to have a clinical diagnosis. When we excluded biased studies like that, we found that the heterogeneity in the results more or less disappeared. So to cut a long story short, we found 4 associations for which there was robust evidence that education in early life was protective. We didn't find the same effect for occupational level. So in later life, the level of occupation that you had achieved and occupational complexity did not seem to be protective against dementia. We found an association between hypertension in midlife and the later onset of dementia, but hypertension in late life was either not associated or there was an inverse association. We found an association between diabetes in midlife and diabetes in late life and the later onset of dementia, and again an association between smoking in midlife or smoking in late life. And what was particularly striking is that a number of studies had shown that older people who had given up smoking actually had the same risk of developing dementia as older people who had never smoked, and it was only older people who continued to smoke that had an increased risk of developing dementia. So I think the mechanisms here that we're talking about are cognitive and brain reserve, as far as the education finding is concerned. It's still unclear about the extent to which there is cognitive plasticity later in life and the benefits of cognitive training or cognitive activity in later life. Vascular disease is another important mechanism, and it's clear that there's probably an additive effect of cerebrovascular disease in combination with Alzheimer's pathology, but it may also be that cerebrovascular disease promotes Alzheimer's disease pathology, and there may be other non-vascular effects of, for example, high cholesterol levels or diabetes centrally on Alzheimer's disease pathology. What we've achieved is we started with a very long list of potential risk factors, and we've reduced these down to 4 where the evidence is strongest, where we can exclude bias and reverse causality, where there's consistency and where there's strong and robust effects. It doesn't mean that other factors may not also be modifiable risk factors, it's just that there's much less consistent evidence and these are insufficiently studied. In particular, I'd highlight physical activity and cognitive activity as 2 areas that are often cited as being modifiable risk factors, but where the evidence currently is actually very weak. So finally, the future research, I think we need to do more studies where dementia is an outcome as opposed to Alzheimer's disease or other subtypes. If you're going to report on Alzheimer's disease, you need to have a dementia diagnosis en route to that, and you throw away valuable evidence. From the point of view of prevention, it's dementia as opposed to the subtypes that's important. We need to have much more collaborative activity on systematic reviews and meta-analyses, bringing together all of the data in a publicly accessible way so that the systematic review process is more robust and everyone can see what's being done. I think there is scope for randomized controlled trials, not really from midlife to late life, but particularly the evidence that diabetes and smoking cessation can actually modify the risk of dementia even in late life. We need to actually see some randomized controlled trials done on this, really to see what the size of the effect might be. And I think trials also like the FINGER trial, which are multi-component and look at modifying all cardiovascular risk in older people who have a high risk of cardiovascular disease, may have particular potential for revealing untapped possibilities for dementia prevention through into late life. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Prince. Very wonderful review of the global prevalence of dementia and also the risk factors of the dementia. And it's very useful information. Thank you very much. And do you have any comments or questions for his presentation? That's okay. All right. Okay. So I'd like to move to the second speaker, Professor Hachinsky. He will give us a presentation with the title of Preventive Dementia. Can we do better? Yes. Please Professor Hachinsky.
Professor Prince, Professor Zuki, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. We can do better, but only if we try different approaches. And thank you for allowing me to share with you a different approach. First of all, we need to acknowledge reality. Secondly, we need to focus on the treatable vascular component. And thirdly, we have to try new multimodal integrated approaches. We think we can diagnose dementia, but can we? This slide is based on the Canadian study of health and aging involving about 12,000 subjects, and we applied different criteria to the same 1,879 demented individuals. If we apply the ICD-10, then 3% of the population of Canada is demented. If we apply DSM-3, 29% is. These criteria are dangerous inaccurate, And the difficulty is we cannot compare studies using one set of criteria to another. So we think we can diagnose dementia. We cannot. How about Alzheimer's disease? This graph is based on the University of Western Ontario dementia study. And it shows you what happens to cognition in two sets of clusters. And this is individuals that we diagnose as having Alzheimer's disease based on clinical evaluation, neuropsychology, imaging, and electroencephalography. And if we said they had Alzheimer's disease and they looked at the pathology, then 81% of the time we were correct. However, please note that there were 22% of individuals, that's the cluster that goes horizontal, who did not deteriorate. If we include these patients in the denominator, then whenever we say someone has pure Alzheimer's disease, we're only correct 44% of the time. We think we can diagnose Alzheimer's disease, but we cannot. How about ultimately the best diagnosis is pathology, isn't it? If you believe that all the explanation is given by pathology 100%, then of course it works for you. But what we did was a bit different. We took 10 published studies and we asked the question, given a particular pathology, how much of cognitive impairment can you explain? Alzheimer pathology only explains 20% of cognitive impairment. Vascular disease explains 28%, but 31% of cognitive impairment cannot be explained by any pathology that we now look at. We cannot treat Alzheimer's disease. We cannot treat the unknown. We can treat vascular disease. Let's do it. Now, I think one of the slides of Professor Prince said standardization. A international group got together and recommended that whenever we describe patients with cognitive impairment, we each should use a minimum set of standards to describe the clinical picture, neuropsychological picture, genetic picture, pathological picture. So we can begin building evidence-based as opposed to eminence-based criteria. It's a long road, but we'll go further by sharing this information and then be able to compare studies. There is recent evidence that all major dementias have a vascular component, ranging from 60% in frontotemporal dementia to 80% in Alzheimer's disease. And importantly, having a vascular component doubles the chances that that patient will develop dementia, because many elderly people harbor Alzheimer's pathology and never have any difficulty in life. And we have evidence, experimental and clinical, that vascular disease is not only a cause of dementia, but a trigger of dementia, as Professor Prince has suggested. We didn't compare notes, by the way, but things are working out. And now and the good news about this is that we have been able to suppress the deterioration in animals with anti-inflammatory agents. And now we're modeling the precise dose of the precise drug to try to change what happens in 20% of stroke patients who go on to develop what appears to be Alzheimer's disease. Now, how do we focus on the treatable vascular component? Well, as you know, the risk factors for dementia and stroke are very similar, and most of them are treatable. The difficulty is that there has not been a single randomized clinical trial that systematically looks at modifying the risk factors and seeing whether this has an effect on cognitive deterioration. Now, most of the literature focuses on the risk of developing dementia. And the assumption is if you let the patient know they have a risk, you advise them, you're willing to treat them, you'll control the risk factors. Reality is otherwise. Preaching doesn't work. It only works if you have motivation and you have enablement. It's very difficult to have a healthy lifestyle in a metabolically toxic environment, which is true of most cities. And by now, half of the world population lives in city, many in big metropolis. In big cities, to get fast food is easy. To get exercise is hard. Pollution damages the lungs, damages the heart, and damages the brain. And what happens in Beijing matters in Tokyo, because we all share the same contiguous biosphere. And if we're going to be successful, we have to apply different methods of controlling vascular risk factors. And we started a pilot study where we randomized patients at risk of stroke to either be part of usual care, which meant we see them in the clinic, evaluate them, do the test, send a letter to the family doctor, and don't see them again unless they get referred back. Or work with a lay person, a non-professional person of the same age and sex who will help them in having a healthy lifestyle. We found in a pilot study a very strong trend in favor of blood pressure control and weight control. And now my colleague Richard Chan is directing a Canada-wide study where we are comparing usual care with having another interested, caring human being to help them have a healthier lifestyle. To change human behavior is very difficult, but the single most powerful factor is another caring human being. So we have finished entering the patients, we'll follow for 2 years, and we will be able to tell you not only whether risk factors are better controlled, but whether cognition is preserved, because 39% of our patients have some degree of cognitive impairment. So in summary, I think we can do better. We must do better. Millions of brains depend on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Hettinsky. A very nice presentation, particularly focusing on the cerebrovascular dementia. So do you have any comments or questions from the floor? Is it okay? Okay, thank you.
Well, I just want to illustrate a personal, I don't know what the results of the study are going to be, of course, but I'm optimistic. I'll tell you why. Some years ago, I fell on the ice. I ripped out a tendon in my left shoulder. The operation was successful, but then I was assigned a small physiotherapist. He was a small man. He worked very hard. I'm a big, bold fellow. And he gave me all these elastic bands to exercise in. And I thought to myself, I'm not going to be an athlete with my left shoulder. Those are boring exercises. Whatever natural movement I have, I'll have. But he would say, Doctor, did you do your exercises? I didn't have the heart to tell him I didn't. So I did, and I have a perfectly functioning shoulder. So having someone who's interested in you and who gives you feedback, and if there's any difficulty, they refer to the team, is a very powerful motivator. And if we show that we can control risk factors for dementia, we can also prevent them for heart attacks. So my point here is that we cannot continue to do same things and expect different results. We have to try other methods.
Right. Thank you. So let's move to the third presenter. Oh, yes, Professor Piu Chen from Beijing, China. Please.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the invitation. So I'm going to talk about the current status and also some of the challenges and strategies that China is trying to apply. And probably you all know that population aging is really a big issue in China. Currently, there are about 200 million people older than 60 in China, and that number is going to go very fast in the next few decades. So this will certainly bring a big issue for dementia, as we know, is age-related diseases. So this slides actually summarize many studies, different types, regarding to the prevalence of dementia in China, Hong Kong, and also Taiwan in the Chinese. So from this slide, you can see the prevalence for people older than 60 is around 4% for dementia, and certainly that number goes pretty significantly with aging. This number is not that different. The prevalence is not that different than other countries. In another report that specifically look at representative cities crossing China from north to south, and also give a similar estimate of 4% of dementia cases for people older than 60. In a study that we have carried out in Beijing, a longitudinal study, we have seen that pretty much the instance of dementia case is around about 1%. So that certainly, I think, kind of give you an astonishing number. We may have new dementia cases of 1.5 to 2 million per year. And China now currently has about 8 million dementia patients, which accounts what Professor Princess have shown, almost half of the number in Asia, 18%, 19%, that's the number. But this number is really going to go fast as the population ages. So certainly that gives us a big challenge. Now, one of the things that I would like to point out here is that the rate of differences crossing from north to south. So we know in China that the stroke instance is pretty much from north to south, from high to low. So it's very corresponding to some of the risk factors that we believe in, vascular etiology for dementia. So what are the issues that we really are facing when we, in China, when we see this big wave of potential risk for dementia coming? As you know, of course, it's going to bring a lot of patients, old people with chronic disease, including dementia, and also the cost is going to be very high. And the big issue is that we are not ready because we pretty barely have any specialized dementia clinic, not like in Japan. And also in China, most patients come to the big hospitals. And even though we have a very spread networks of community clinicals, but probably which mostly are served as a drug dispenser. Basically, people go there taking drugs because the whole coverage of by the insurance, but patients still come to the big hospitals for diagnosis and therapy. So we don't have really a good family doctor system and no GPs, which are the major issues for the government to try to develop. Certainly we don't have well-established training centers, education centers for people to caring dementia patients. Coming to the nursing homes, and we already has a very limited number of nursing homes. There is even worse when it comes to the specialized dementia nursing home. And also we lack of the special caretakers for dementia patients. So pretty much we don't have really a good system established in China to taking care of dementia patients, which is very bad. But I will say later, maybe a good thing because we can reinvent everything based on the experience that everybody sitting here could contribute, and that's what we're trying to do. The last thing I really want to see, very especially for China, is the burden of the family. So as you can see here, and we have, because of family control policy, So now we have lots of families with this 4-to-1 kind of structure, which means a couple should take care of 4 parents with their kid. And even in some of the families, not just the 4 parents, but also their grandparents. So this is a tremendous burden, not just financially, but mostly caring and long-term care of those old people. So really, it's time to act. And in the current reforming that's going on in China, across all aspects in the society, including medical reform, including urbanization in the middle and small cities, including reform in the financial sector, or even including reform in the political sector. I think those will really give a good opportunity for people to think about how to take care of dementia patients. So there are some actions being already taken. For instance, we are really promoting awareness dementia in the community. I mean, I don't know if people have noticed, even the CCTV starting to have dementia programs in the best time, 7:30 time. So really that can show a lot of attention or play a major role in education for the patient, for the people. Also now we are establishing more dementia clinicals. The first guidelines for dementia clinical has just announced, published, and the government is paying more for the drugs that treat dementia, and also including dementia as one of the chronic disease for the special schemes of special insurance. And that we are building more specialized dementia homes, including the government and also private sectors. And one of the major ideas that we are trying to develop is this so-called care and nursing combined community hospital. So that really representing one of the things the government and the people are thinking, how can we build a continuing service and care facilities that really can take care of the demented or the old people. Since we can really build a better, not that fragmented system, so it will be better to do this kind of hospital that can link to private or GPs, private doctors, GPs. So this is something that the government has announced, and we are really discussing all the details and see how that could happen. Socially, and we have established National Day on Dementia, and enforced laws require kids to take care of their parents, even though it's very controversial. So the law says you have to go back to see your parents. And I don't know how that's going to be implemented, but it happens. And also, it's promoting other sectors to invest in the care of demented people or old people. In terms of prevention, really the government has invested a lot of money into research for early diagnosis and intervention, and also open-minded for any programs that can build integrated services system for demented people. I will just give very few examples. The first thing is on the academic side, we're promoting biomarker initiatives, early intervention initiatives, early diagnosis initiatives, mainly to identify people in early stage. So a real preventive strategies can happen at different stages of the life. And as I mentioned earlier, we're really trying to build integrated systems to ensuring continued management of elder people, so that can serve as a preventive measure, ensure the preventive measure, and also care to many people can smoothly happen. So for instance, one of the model that will link the dementia clinical with the community caring, nursing, combined hospitals, with the internet information system. Because China is very big, very diversified, large population. So how can we mobilize people, utilize the limited resources to caring for a large population? We really depends on the information system. So that can link the people to the doctor and to all the different facilities. Specifically in terms of intervention, there are a lot of work and quite few publications have demonstrated that exercise, increased leisure activities, even playing mahjong can delay or reduce cognitive impairment in the L people. In our longitudinal studies, we have demonstrated that people who have more leisure activity, more physical exercise, they have much lower prevalence of cognitive impairment and dementia in their later stage. In the therapeutic level, and lots of activities have been carried out in terms of utilize the Chinese traditional medicine, acupuncture, and exercise, this is the last slide, to prevent or help to prevent, slow down the disease progression. We hope with the reform of the system combined with whatever the scientific advances, and that we can be better established for preventing the forthcoming wave of dementia in China. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Chen. And we understand that population aging and dementia, the reality in China, and we understand also you are trying many preventive trials, just carrying out. Okay. Do you have any question or comments? Oh, yes, please. Excuse me, the microphone.
Jill Ayling from UK government. Can I ask, given the unprecedented burden of dementia, why China doesn't have dementia as a national priority? I understand dementia is under mental health rather than a priority in itself.
We do have, in China, because it's a huge, and then many different agencies or departments all involved in this type of work. So in fact, in the Ministry of Science and Technology, in the Ministry of Health, I personally have participated, involved, developing the initiatives on intervention of neurodegenerative disease, including dementia, since the 11th five-year plan. So there's really ongoing a lot of things. I think that one of the things probably is less propaganda or announcement, particularly by the scientific field. The government level, I think they have a lot of policies. They keep saying we'll do this and that. There is also a gap between the policy with what actually is going on at the academic level. So I think it will do better, but certainly the government has really noticed this issue and been doing a lot of things, but we need to integrate them.
Okay, yes, please.
Hello, my name is Mark Wortman from Alzheimer Disease International. I just wanted to make a comment. You mentioned CCTV. For the people in London, CCTV is the 4 million cameras that are watching us all day, Big Brother. But in China, it's the main TV station. And they did a fantastic series of interviews and filming of people with dementia and their families. And they received the ADI award in 2013 because this was seen as a major project. So that was very well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we would like to move to the next speaker. And next speaker is Professor Yanagisawa. And he will give us a presentation, detection of preclinical Alzheimer diseases for the preemptive therapy. So please.
Okay. Thank you, chairpersons. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizing committee for providing me this opportunity to talk this very prestigious conference. Today, I'd like to discuss the significance of the detection of preclinical Alzheimer's disease to develop the preemptive therapy of the disease. Obviously, Alzheimer's disease is a devastating dementia, and the number of patients is still growing worldwide. So this is a very beautiful, nice picture, and actually very prevailing picture. But unfortunately, he, the grandfather of this family, is a patient of familial Alzheimer's disease. So definitely, we must stop the Alzheimer's disease before it starts. So to this end, many pharmaceutical companies have been struggling uphill battles to develop the disease-modifying drugs. But unfortunately, the results so far very, very disappointing. So the development of these across small compounds or antibodies have been already discontinued or almost discontinued because of the lack of the efficacy or due to unexpected side effect. So why do we fail in these trials? Why don't we succeed in the development of these drugs? I think there are two possible explanations. First one is that we may not know anything about Alzheimer's disease, and we are always mistargeting in the development of the drugs. Hopefully this is not the case. And second possibility is that we are always too late for the therapeutic intervention. I think this is much more likely. So thanks to the development of the amyloid imaging on PET, we now know that amyloid deposition is the initial pathological event of Alzheimer's disease precedes 10 years, 20 years, the onset of clinical sign of dementia. So this slide shows the temporal axis of the Alzheimer's disease. Again, amyloid deposition comes first. And then it is followed by loss of synapses, loss of neurons, entangled formation, and then various pathological change, including inflammation. And importantly, and surprisingly, the cognitive dysfunctions comes later. I mean, becomes manifest getting over the clinical threshold. 10 years or 20 years after the occurrence of the amyloid deposition. So you can divide pathological process of Alzheimer's disease into two different phases: early phase and late phase. Early phase is amyloid-dependent phase, and late one is the amyloid-independent phase. I hate admit it. I'm sorry. Anti-amyloid therapy should be effective only in this early phase, but unfortunately, previous and current clinical trials are always targeting this late phase. It's too late. I think we were absolutely wrong. As the Professor Sparring of Harvard Medical School stressed, clinical trials for Alzheimer's disease should be performed at right time against right people. Yeah? So we should perform then early enough at this stage. So we call it preemptive therapy as sort of the secondary prevention of the disease. Yeah? So very critical, important point or question here is that how should you know the existence of pathological change of Alzheimer's disease before clinical onset? How should you identify people at the risk of development of Alzheimer's disease preceding clinical sign of dementia? This is very critical point, I think. And currently, 2 methods are available for this end. One method, procedure, is that cerebrospinal fluid examination. So it looks like very simple, but definitely this procedure is invasive and especially difficult for the elderly people. And second one is, as I mentioned earlier, amyloid imaging on PET, positional emission tomography. But this is very costly and hardly available for usual hospital and usual clinical departments. So investigators are now searching for a possibility of using plasma as a source of possible biomarkers for Alzheimer's disease, because taking blood is very easy and much safer. But results so far are very, very disappointing. Measuring amyloid beta protein, major proteinous component of the amyloid fibrils, have not been satisfactory for this, satisfactory informative on the state of the disease, or informative on the degree of the amyloid deposition. As you see, there are overlapping control and patients, control patient, control patients. Yeah? So they are not, unfortunately, satisfactory informative on the state of the disease. So actually, we are collaborating Dr. Koichi Tanaka's group, Shimazu Corporation, very famous and very big, strong laboratory in Japan. Actually, they have recently developed a novel procedure to detect amyloid beta protein from plasma using a very sophisticated mass spectrometry. Using this system, you can readily detect amyloid beta protein 1 to 40 and 1 to 42, and also other amyloid beta approximate related peptides. And we are now collaborating, and we are now looking at the correlation between the levels of these peptides and a degree of amyloid deposition, which were determined by PIB amyloid imaging. I'm very sorry I cannot provide the results today, but hopefully I can give you the results very soon. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Yanagisawa, giving us a very advanced and current findings on the new method to have a good diagnosis for Alzheimer's disease using some plasma. And do you have any question or comment, Professor Hashinsky?
Another reason why clinical trials may have failed is that the pathology is multiple.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So if you know, even if you had 100% anti-amyloid drug, you only could.
Yeah.
Even if you had 100% effective anti-amyloid agent, you would only deal with 20% of the pathology.
Yeah.
So I think, however, there are answers. We can now look in vivo in some of those pathologies.
Mm-hmm.
You can image amyloid deposition, tau deposition, inflammation, and with the biomarkers that you described, particularly plasma ones, we can actually build mechanistic models that we can attack the mechanisms and not these vague diagnoses.
Yeah.
And an example is HIV. It takes 3 different drugs to control. And what makes us think that an aging brain with multiple pathologies is less complex? So I think that there is hope in stepping back, attacking mechanisms as opposed to these vague diagnoses.
Yeah. Totally agree with you. So we need to recruit correctly the individual for the clinical trials for the anti-amyloid therapy. So that is also very important. Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Any other question? That's okay. Okay, thank you very much for President Isawa.
So thanks very much. I'd like now to introduce the next speaker, who is Professor Liang Kung Chen from Taiwan. He's the director of the Center for Geriatrics and Gerontology at Taipei Veterans General Hospital and the National Yangming University from Taiwan.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today I would like to share some ongoing clinical trial in Taiwan for dementia prevention, as well as the developing process of the national policy against dementia in Taiwan. So we have published some data in a very big retirement community. We found that there are several risk factors that will cause or fasten the cognitive decline of the older person, including physical function, and also some geriatric syndromes. So aside from the traditional risk factors we found that probably along with aging, the physical function also decline together with the cognitive function. And we also found that eventually the late life metabolic syndrome can be protective against dementia. And that's probably the reason of the good nutrition instead of the cardiovascular risk. So we also noticed that nutrition is a very good, it's a very important factor against dementia. On the other hand, we also do some integrated non-pharmacological services for the people with dementia. We found that through those integrated process, eventually we can reduce not only behavioral symptoms, but also the psychotic symptoms for those older person with dementia through a very well-organized, integrated approach. So altogether, we're thinking probably we can gather all those evidences to have a more comprehensive and integrated preventive program for the older people in the community. So at least based on our previous research, several things should be integrated. So that should increase. So we should have more physical activities. We should have some cognitive training. We should have good nutrition, and we should have a good management, optimal management for the chronic conditions. Because each single chronic disease or chronic conditions like hypertension or diabetes, eventually at different stage of the life, you should have different goal of management. So we should aim to optimize the management of the chronic condition. Therefore, we launched a nationwide randomized controlled trial with the support by the Health Promotion Administration, the Ministry of Health and Welfare. Before this study, eventually there are several national campaigns to prevent dementia in Taiwan, and also we have a national mission statement to prevent dementia in Taiwan. However, all those strategies are not very well organized. It is such as a national exercise for the grandparent campaign or the national grandparent storytelling campaign, things like that. But it's not a very organized program. So the government would like to, after the national mission statement, we are hoping to organize a very good integrated approach in the community so that we can prevent the occurrence of dementia. So this study is supported by the government, and I'm the main PI of this project. So it is a nationwide randomized controlled trial, but we basically include those who have some symptoms but not really disabled physically or cognitive. So they may be slow in the walking speed. They may complain some subjective memory problems. They may have IADL impairment. So that's so you can have either one of them that can be included. And we provide an integrated program that mainly composed of physical activities, cognitive training, dietary counseling, and chronic disease management altogether. So this study is done on 5 sites in Taiwan. So the Taipei, Taichung, Kaohsiung are 3 major cities in Taiwan. So, but Yilan and Kinmen is a distant island which is closer to mainland China instead of Taiwan. So the two places, Kinmen and Yilan, are supposed to be a rural area. So we include people from the urban cities as well as the rural communities. And this is, eventually this is a 4-year program, but we provide a 6-month intervention program. But this study basics is composed for 2 parts. The first part is to prove the efficacy of this program. But the second part is even more important to the government, is we have to develop a nationwide strategy to implement this program. So there's the policy research in the second part. So in the first part, it's more like a clinical trial. We try to prove the efficacy of one program. But the second part is more challenging to us, to develop a policy that should be effective, so that we can help every community to implement this effective program. So this is our program. So basically now we have just finished the subject enrollment. So we had around 1,200 subjects. So their mean age about 75, and they have relatively lower formal education. By that time, 75 years ago, well, they're not having very good opportunity to have formal education. And basically, they are pretty healthy. So the ideal impairment is very limited. So eventually, they got 7.1 score from out of 8 of the IDL. And their nutrition is pretty good. It's a short form M&A is almost the full mark. And they have very low depressive symptoms. So they are the community dwelling, otherwise healthy person. But they are a little bit slow in walking. So the walking speed is 0.9. And the grip strength is somewhat lower, a little bit lower. So they're a little bit weak, a little bit slow, but they're also a little bit low in the MoCA. So they have some cognitive symptom already. But none of them had been diagnosed as dementia. So basically, of those 1,200 subjects, they are old person with low education, with some cognitive impairment, some cognitive symptoms, and with certain degree of physical frailty. We are hoping this integrated program can also prevent physical frailty as well as cognitive decline. We don't want a program that is designed specifically for one condition. And in the community, so the community dwelling elderly will have to receive so many different programs to fight against serial conditions for the older person. So we want to create a more integrated program. So for those subjects, it's very compatible with epidemiology in Taiwan. About half of them have hypertension, and about 20% of them have diabetes. But very remarkable thing is about 30% of them have sleeping problems. So this is how we're doing the cognitive training. It's more focused on the memory training and the deductive function training. So we're hoping them to do more cognitive stimulation. So it is led by our occupational therapists. It can be group-based, it also can be person-based. And with a very high frequency in the first month. So it's twice a week, 8 courses in the first month, and then gradually reduced to 4 courses in the second month. But in the following, in the month 3 to month 6, it will be once a month, but we will have to educate them to maintain those activities at home, because in the end, we are hoping they're keeping this good habit at home, keep doing those cognitive training on their own, not necessary to come to attend all those courses. So same as the physical activities. So it is also led by our physical trainers. That is more resistant exercise focused, but also contains aerobic exercise. So we're hoping them to have 150 minutes exercise per week. So the dose has to be maintained. And then, so in order to help them to establish this good habit in exercise, so we're having 2 courses in the first month, 2 courses per week in the first month, and then 1 course per week in the second month. And the following thing is similar to the cognitive stimulation. So we're hoping them to keep those habits at home. And then we do the dietary and personal counseling for their chronic conditions, because every participant may have different chronic diseases. So we're hoping the dietitian is helping them, and we're hoping the GP can also get involved, that we can optimize the goal of disease management. So this is my last slide because this is an ongoing trial. I'm sorry that I cannot provide the data that for the effectiveness, but we're pretty positive for the effectiveness because based on the previous research, we think this program may work. But the most important thing to the government is how to make it really happen in the community after the clinical trial. So it's not just a scientific clinical trial. It is a policy from the government. So after the first 3 years, in the fourth year, we will have to develop another randomized control trial to implement this policy to the community by using a lot of skills of social marketing. We're hoping to provide strategies together with this intervention program to the government so that in every community they can do this program and the government also provides some assistance for the community to maintain this activity. So first thing, we have to validate this program of the THISCE. This is a Taiwan Health Intervention Study for community dwelling elders. So we have to validate. Now we're on the status of validating the effectiveness of this program. And then we have to develop a lot of social marketing strategies, trying to promote those activities in the community. And at last, we have to do another randomized control trial. So that's the combination of two randomized control trials. So for the policy part, the randomized control trial will be very, very difficult. Then we're hoping that those strategies is effective. So to improve the overall participation of this program in each individual community. So after that, maybe 2 years later, we'll be able to show you the result that the real clinical effectiveness of the program and the effectiveness of this social marketing strategy. So this is my talk today. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Professor Chen, for that very interesting talk about the TICE trial. And I think that's indicative of increasing international interest in these attempts systematically to intervene in order to alter trajectories of aging. But does anyone have any questions for Professor Chen briefly? Yes, there's a question there and a question here as well, I think.
Thank you. You talked about convincing government to implement in the communities. Are you therefore looking at the cost-benefit analysis of reduction in health and social care as a result of this, and also quality of life for people with dementia and their families?
Well, to be honest, we did not include that in this part so far. But we're thinking, because now we're in the first part of the RCT, so we're now developing the second part of the RCT. So your comment will be very valuable. Probably we can add those in the second part of the RCT. Thank you very much.
If you're going to convince governments to invest, they'll want to know what the cost benefit is.
Well, because it's a government-initiated program, so anyway they would do it.
Good answer, that one. And I have a microphone here for...
Who are the controls?
Yeah, we do have the same inclusion and exclusion criteria, and we randomize them based on the community. For a certain community, they are the intervention group. For the control group, they're using the conventional health promotion programs, which is not this intense, which is only provided by the public nurses. They are giving them some principles of exercise, providing some classes. But that is not that well organized. And they also provide some counseling and health promotion activities. That is the conventional group. So this is the control group.
Are you using cluster randomization?
Yes.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you for those clarifications. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
So I'd like now to introduce the next speaker, who is Dr. Hiroyuki Shimada, and he's the head of the Center for Gerontology and Social Science at the National Center for Geriatrics and Gerontology here in Japan.
Thank you, Dr. Prince. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to talk about a scheme for preventing cognitive decline in the community. I'll speak Japanese from here. Please take your earphone. 日本の皆様
I think the Japanese audience can listen with a bit of a relaxed mood now. I would like to speak in Japanese from here. So here are the first information that I'd like to show you. This is the changes in prevalence in people. How much can we delay or reduce the onset of the disease? We look at the prevalence currently, and if we set that as a baseline, then if we say we were able to delay the onset for 2 years, then the prevalence going forward will be reduced by approximately 20%, they say. And if we are able to delay the onset for 5 years from the baseline, then it would mean that the prevalence will be reduced by over 40%. This is the calculation that has been made here. Therefore, prevention of dementia with a long-term perspective actually has a very good efficacy. This is our findings that we are starting to see today. Now, for dementia prevention, in the ideal world, we would like to provide an equal amount of service to all aged persons, but in reality, that is impossible. Therefore, we need to set a target and think of countermeasures for prevention. And the target here is mild cognitive impairment, MCI. This is the target that we have focused on. Yes, these MCI people are very susceptible to an onset of dementia, but on the other hand, they still have a normal cognitive function as well, so there is a possibility that they can recover to normality. This information has been revealed, and when we look at these results, we see that participants with dementia after 2 years, this is the percentage, the cognitive function was normal in the beginning at the time. 2 years later from that, 1.1% of the people had dementia. And now we have the breakdown of MCI. Depending on the type of MCI, the percentage is slightly different, but we have numbers like 5.6 or 9.1. Compared to the normal people, normal patients, they have 5 times, 8 times possibility of prevailing with dementia. Therefore, MCI people are very susceptible to having dementia. But then we look at this one. There are people who have returned to normal cognitive status 2 years later. When we look at the MCI single domain, which is just one cognitive function that has been deteriorated, which means that the symptoms are relatively light. For these people, 30%, 40% of the patients have gone back to normal cognitive functions. This is the knowledge that we have today. But on the other hand, when we focus on the multiple domains, people who have dysfunctions in multiple number of cognitive fields, then the people who can go back to normality is as low as 5% or 10%. So depending on the regions in the world, in order to be active and take measures to address people with cognitive impairment, we need to address them as early as possible and provide tangible approaches or solutions to them at an early stage. It leads us to think that that is the appropriate measure to take to show some efficacy. So now we're focusing on how to define MCI. We have health checkups to find people with MCI. What we have in Japan currently is, well, in the health checkup menus, first of all, we have some checkups that try to find daily life-related diseases, but it doesn't mean that that would detect Alzheimer's disease, much less the possibility of having Alzheimer's disease in the future. So that's why we've focused on the first screening stage. This is a test to detect cognitive impairment. And by doing this, we are trying to pick up the MCI patients from the community and introduce them to these programs that you see on the right side. this flow of taking the MCIs into this program, the workflow is very important, we believe. This is in Nature. It's an article regarding Alzheimer disease. Activity is the best medicine, it says in the headlines. This is social dancing. I don't know what they're actually doing here, but they're doing some kind of a brain exercise, I guess, as they dance. And by the way, she has a glass of polyphenol, which is basically red wine. And it seems like their point is that these are some of the activities that are effective to Alzheimer's disease. And there are some knowledges, bit here and bit there recently. And it just says that it's potentially effective, but it is not proven scientifically that drinking wine, social dancing, and doing brain training will be effective for Alzheimer's. So that's why our team in NCGG is doing this randomized controlled trial to properly scientifically confirm the effect. We actually have approached the community dance lesson courses and also music classes on the bottom left to provide them musical activities to prevent, to try to prevent and see if we can prevent cognitive impairment. The middle one is about a fitness club. So in the fitness club, you see these people exercising. And here again, we are trying to verify whether this has any effect on the prevention of Alzheimer's or not. The bottom right is a cafe, a small group of people doing some sort of studying at the cafe. And again, we're trying to verify if the continuance of such activities has any effect on Alzheimer's. So, how much of this type of activity is impacting Alzheimer's disease? The items on the bottom are risk factors to Alzheimer's. Among these factors, the one that is most related to Alzheimer's disease is, according to this research, physical inactivity. This was the one that was most attributable to the onset of Alzheimer's disease. So therefore, the first and foremost thing that we need to be doing to prevent Alzheimer is to exercise or to solve the problem of lack of exercise. This seems to be a reasonable conclusion. Now moving on to why. Why exercising helps to suppress Alzheimer's or dementia, if any. So we're verifying the possibilities here, and we see that exercise does have various effects. For example, cardiovascular type of effect. Like if you exercise, your blood pressure goes down. Or the fatty substance metabolism goes up, helping the cardiovascular or even cerebral diseases. So this is why we tie the conclusion that exercises are effective to supporting cardiovascular health, for example, and also neurotrophic factors, especially for the hippocampus area. This is really related highly. So neurotrophic factors also are related to brain health. This is another way to think. And obviously, if you exercise, you gain more physical health. It helps you build a body that makes you more active, and your body functions better. Therefore, it leads to making better choices to prevent dementia. So this is the mechanism that we have sort of organized, but we don't quite know which factor is the most effective, which one is the most attributable to the prevention. We assume that it's a complicated mixture, intertwined mixture of these items together, supporting the prevention or the delaying of Alzheimer's disease and dementia. But on the other hand, when we look at the MCI patients, we actually have a clinical trial that had targeted them, and it does not necessarily say that exercises improve cognitive functions. This is a conclusion that was published, actually, in the recent papers. Yes, there was a certain function that was impacted by exercises, but processing speed and memory, which is one of the central function of dementia, exercise was not attributable as the effect. So we're looking at different kinds of exercise, and we actually came up with something called Cognisize. Cognisize, you see two brains here, and you can see that the left one is done by aerobic exercise, the typical physical exercise. But on top of that, if you do some cognitive exercise, the brain is more active. This has been clarified in this. We actually looked at 308 elderly patients with MCI and confirmed it with RCT. And we see that there was a certain level of a decrease in the level of cognitive impairment. And also the functions, cognitive functions or performances have improved as well. And also it prevented a certain degree of shrinking as well, atrophy. So we have been able to confirm, according to the MCI elderly patients, it does contribute to improving the performance or delaying the deterioration of the performance. So the first step that we need to take is to provide health checkups, checking the cognitive area in the community, pick up the MCIs properly, and provide these programs to them. We believe that that is the important thing to do. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you much. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Shimada. Are there any questions for Dr. Shimada? So, Dr. Hiroshinsky?
I believe you said that in your analysis you didn't find exercise to be useful. And yet we see that this, according to Professor Shimada, this is the most powerful one. Could you please have a discussion and clarify it for us?
Well, I don't know if you want to take that, Dr. Shimada, or me, but I don't think our findings were inconsistent, actually. So you presented findings from trials suggesting no benefit of physical activity on cognitive functions. And most of the epidemiology, actually all of it, is short-term trials, short-term cohort studies with a very strong possibility that it's actually the prodromal effects of dementia impacting on people's activity levels as opposed to physical exercise being protective, explaining those associations. There's no long-term cohort studies at all demonstrating an effect. So it was really that there's too weak evidence to be able to say clearly, which I think is what you're saying and what you're attempting to address in your research.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Dr. Shimada? I had one actually about the Cognisize. It sounds a silly question, but are they doing the cognitive activity at the same time as doing the exercise, or are they two independent interventions that are happening over the same time period?
Yeah.
I wondered, like the picture of them dancing, doing the cognitive thing at the same time.
Sorry, in Japan.
日本語で失礼。
コグニサイズは例えばですね、運動しながら
Cognisize is you exercise, and while you're exercising, you do math, or you do, word puzzles, some kind of brain activity, brain exercise, using linguistics or numbers while exercising. And we know that that does a good degree of activation.
So essentially you're hoping that the improved brain flow and the cognitive activity together is going to be beneficial. Yeah.
Yes,
Thank
that's
you.
right.
Yes.
If there are no other questions for Dr. Shimada, no? Okay. So thank you very much indeed. So it's my pleasure to introduce the next speaker, Professor Dawn Brooker, who's the Director of the Association for Dementia Studies at the University of Worcester, Association for Dementia Studies, UK.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. I will be speaking in English. Thanks very much to my friends here in Japan and also to my friends in the UK and in Europe. And particular thanks to my team, the Association for Dementia Studies at Worcester University. I founded the Association for Dementia Studies in 2009, and this was the same year that the National Dementia Strategy was launched in England, and I think it's been very important for us to have that National Dementia Strategy. We're a multidisciplinary research centre. We focus on a whole range of research projects around person-centred dementia care and delivering an evidence base for that from timely diagnosis through to end of life. In 12 minutes, I'm hoping to cover by what we mean by person-centred care. It's a term we hear a lot, but often fail to really understand what it means. I will then give an overview of the RCTs that there have been in this area, the random control trials. I then want to speak about the FITS into practice implementation study that we've just completed, and I'll finish with a case study from the Enriched Opportunities Programme. The term person-centred care has been with us for a long time. It was first talked about by the late Professor Tom Kitwood back in 1998. His description of the enriched model of dementia and the maintenance of personhood through the eradication of malignant social psychology remains the backbone of the definition of person-centred care that we work with today. Kitwood suggested that the main vehicle for the delivery of person-centred care was to ensure that care practitioners, i.e. care staff and professionals, were empathic in their relationships with those that they cared for. He developed a tool called dementia care mapping, which many people now have learnt worldwide as a way of trying to improve the quality of care. He brought all of these ideas together in his final book in 1997. And unfortunately, his death just a year later meant that we then lost his contribution to the ongoing evidence base for person-centred care. And I guess my research work over the past 15 years has primarily been focusing on developing ways of putting that theory into practice and trying to develop that evidence base. In 2004, I published what has become known as the VIP's framework for person-centred dementia care. We can use these guiding principles to support personhood in people with dementia in all our practice, whether we're a hospital doctor giving an examination or whether we're a care worker helping somebody to eat their meal. And these guiding principles would be this: do my actions show that I respect, value and honour this person? Am I treating this person as a unique individual? Am I making a serious attempt to see my actions from the perspective of the person that I'm trying to help, and how might my actions be interpreted by them? And do my actions help this person to feel socially confident and that they are not alone? The English National NICE Guidelines on Dementia in 2006 took those guiding principles as their starting point for subsequent policy guidance on dementia care. I wrote this little green book in 2007, and it was published into Japanese in 2011, and I'm sure there are people here who can tell you where you can get a copy if you're interested in following that through. Okay, so that's an overview of person-centred care. What about the research evidence? Well, developing a robust evidence base for person-centred care that is, by its definition, is tailored to individual need and contextual relationships is a major challenge. Person-centred care is not a single intervention. It's not like giving a particular therapy or giving a particular drug. The challenge is to describe service-level interventions that enable the practice of person-centred care. And despite this challenge, though, there have been now a respectable trickle of RCTs since around 2006. But this is a complex intervention, and my advice for any researcher in this area is that the UK Medical Research Council framework for complex interventions is a particularly powerful one to follow, rather than leaping to an RCT too quickly on something that is ill-defined. We have a number of studies now that have looked at RCTs for people living in their own homes, that's tried to improve the quality of person-centred care for people living at home. These innovative ways of helping people in the earlier stages of dementia is a particularly active stage of research at the moment. And I would recommend the Interdem network, the website that is there. There's a lot of ongoing research now looking at how we improve quality of life through person-centred care for that group. RCTs within care home research are more established, although demonstrating interventions that can be replicated in practice remains a challenge. And to date, these RCTs, because they're English language possibly, are from the States, from the UK, from Europe, and from Australia. So how we apply these interventions in low and middle income countries is also unproven. Okay, fits into practice. We've just completed an implementation study of an earlier cluster randomised control trial called the Fits into Practice programme. And FIT stands for Focused Intervention, Training and Support. And this is a care home study. The original 2006 paper that was published in the BMJ, the objective of that was to reduce the use of antipsychotic medication in residents with dementia in a care home through the use of person-centred care and supportive interventions. And the RCT took place in 12 care homes. It's followed the MRC framework. My whole 12 minutes would go if I talked about the whole of these acknowledgements here. But this is a study with a long pedigree, and this is the final chapter in it that I want to talk about. This is a graph of the results of the original Fossey et al. Study in 2006. You can see that in the red line we have the intervention homes, and in the blue line we have the control homes. And we can see that initially, although both sets of homes decreased in their antipsychotic prescribing when they'd had a medication review, it was only in the homes where there'd been an intervention, so that the staff actually knew how to do something differently, that we saw an increased reduction of antipsychotics. In the control homes, it went back up higher than before. Okay, so Fits into Practice was an implementation study of that RCT, because that original research project was high cost and intensive, using an expensive FITS therapist who individually supported care within that particular care home. So we've worked with the Alzheimer Society and the originators of the FITS programme to design, implement and evaluate a programme to look at it in practice across 100 plus care homes. So the Fits into Practice programme consisted of 2 dementia practice development coaches employed and supported by us. They delivered training and supervision to dementia care coaches who were regular staff from the care homes. The dementia care coaches attended a 10-day training programme over a 3-month period, meeting fortnightly in 2-day blocks. So this is an intensive piece of education. And following that training, the dementia care coaches also then attended monthly supervision sessions for a 6-month period whilst they implemented this care in their own homes. We recruited 106 homes and of a range of backgrounds. We implemented the education and supervision, and 67 of the homes completed. So it's a fair dropout rate. But of those that completed, the coaches evaluated the intervention, both training and supervision, highly. Pre-post questionnaires demonstrated increased knowledge of dementia, increased confidence and improved attitudes. And we still showed a 30% reduction in antipsychotic prescribing as within this implementation study. But crucial for FITS into practice to succeed was the allocation and protection of time for the DCCs to attend training and carry out the implementation task. And this is the key. We know how to enable this to happen, but if we're going to really implement this properly, we need to be allocating time and skills to do it. Okay, I've had my 1-minute warning, so I now want to show a series of pictures from the Enriched Opportunities Programme. This is available in the public domain, and if you want to read the papers, please do. But I want to talk about one of the ladies as a case study. This is Mrs. May Williams. She was admitted to the Lady Forrester care home from a hospital. She has dementia. She'd been in hospital for 7 weeks and was admitted to this care home with a note that said, all needs, no mobility, not eating. This is her 6 days after admission to the care home. She looks unwell, but she's up and being encouraged to take an interest. 1 month later, we have her baking. Six weeks later, she's certainly looking fatter in the face and looking forward to her meal. Here she is enjoying a cup of tea with her teddy bear. Here she is having an Indian head massage, something that I don't think Mrs. May Williams would ever have had in the past, but is clearly enjoying. 2 months later, we have old skills returning. Silk scarves. 3 months later, she's up dancing to music. And here we have a Mexican celebration. So this is for the lady who was all needs, no mobility, not eating. What we have here is the transformation of good person-centred care. Lots of interventions took place, but there wasn't a single intervention that made a difference here. The care staff also didn't know that they were doing anything unusual. These photos were taken as part of a bigger project to look at the range of activities that were happening, and it was only when we had when we put them in chronological order that we realised what the transformation that had occurred for this lady. And my take-home message is this: person-centred care transforms lives. If we put person-centred principles into practice globally, we would save millions of people from misery. And we don't need to wait till 2025 to have an impact. We can do that right now. What we need to prioritise from a research point of view is robust implementation studies across the whole journey with dementia. How do we get person-centred care from early diagnosis to end of life? And particularly, how do we implement that in low and middle income countries? Stuff from a UK care home study is not going to translate, but those guiding principles of person-centred care, in my experience of working around the world, translate into whatever country you're working in. And to do that, you know, one of the things that we're doing today is developing those strong international networks for sharing data on what works. You know, as somebody said to me today, let's not pool our knowledge of ignorance. We know a lot about person-centred care. Let's pool it together, because together we're much stronger than we are separately. Thank you very much.
So thanks very much indeed, Dawn, for that powerful demonstration that living well with dementia is perfectly possible, and also that thoughtful intervention can transform the care process and the outcomes. We probably have time for just one question for Professor Brooker. We have a Mark.
Yeah, thank you very much for your inspiring talk. You mentioned ADI in your last slide.
I did.
I think we need to pick this up, but we are creating a global alliance beyond the dementia community with other international bodies like the Red Cross and HelpAge. I will talk a bit about it tomorrow. That could be a great platform for this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We have, I think, on the research side, you know, we've heard a lot of today around prevention research. Really important that we get that cross-fertilisation. The care research can sometimes get lost, I think, from that agenda. And there are a number of us through Interdem and through the International Group of Dementia Care Mappers that's been going now for many years, who've been working in this field, I think, who could contribute a lot to that. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Dawn. So I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who's Graham Stokes, the Global Director of Dementia Care from BUPA. And from the title of his talk, I think we're going to hear something very complementary to the previous presentation. Graham.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you for the invitation to speak here today. I'm going to talk about people at the advanced stages of dementia who are residing in care homes. I just want to pick up very briefly on what Dawn Brooker has just said. Undeniably, person-centred approaches to care are valued and valuable. The challenge we face is that they are, as she has said, costly, they're time-intensive, and I want to capture a flavour of the real world of dementia care in care homes who are looking after people with complex conditions. In the United Kingdom, we have 432,000 people living in care homes. And it's estimated by Alzheimer Society in England that about 80% of those people now are living with dementia or significant memory problems. So that means that approximately 300,000 people with dementia are living in care homes, most with high dependency needs, challenging behaviours and end-of-life care needs. That's 40% of all people with dementia in the UK. These people are receiving dementia care within institutions, and that generates an interesting question. We hear it so often, this person needs dementia care. And that question is, well, what actually is dementia care? And it's obvious. It's caring for people whose brains are so damaged by disease, they're incapable of taking responsibility for their hygiene, their personal care and daily lives. It's also about caring for people whose judgment is so impoverished by pathology, they cannot take responsibility for their actions. So that is the general understanding of dementia care and what is needed, especially for people with advanced conditions. And with the presentation from China, it was said there was an inadequate number of dementia care specialist homes. So that's what we require, because that's what dementia care is, except it's not. That's not what dementia care is. It's grossly simplistic to believe that it is. What dementia care is caring for people who do not know they need to be cared for. The loss of insight, the loss of self-awareness means to say we have a most challenging population of people living in care homes. I think what we can say is that when a person with dementia knows that they need us, they need us least. When they need us most, they know they do not need us at all. It means to say we have to start shifting the paradigm of what we mean by dementia care. It's also the case that a significant number of people are dying with dementia in care homes. So we wish to provide people with a quality of life with dementia, as Dawn has expressed articulately, and also we need to give them a quality of death. But that quality of life and death is placed into the hands of people who in the UK are unqualified, often undertrained, paid poorly, and constitute a transient workforce. we see approximately 25 to 30% of all nurses and care workers in care homes leaving within 12 months of appointment. So maybe that accounts for what was discovered by the Alzheimer Society report in 2013. Alzheimer Society in England publishes annually excellent reports that improves our knowledge of dementia care. And the report from last year stated that 68% of residents' relatives said quality of care was good, but only 41% of people said that their quality of life was good. There's clearly a difference between quality of care and quality of life. Quality of care is just one constituent part of a quality of life. It is not one and the same thing. And I'm not saying it's the sole answer, but possibly a contributory factor to the fact that there is a low quality of life. But also that figure of 68% still means say nearly a third of people are saying they don't value the quality of care that's provided, may well be attributable to the fact, as I've said, this is a transient workforce that may well be disconnected from the delivery of quality care. So there is a need to improve quality of care and quality of life within care homes. The question is, how do we do that? Between 2012 and June 2013, there was an evidence-based project to identify and prioritise unanswered questions. These are known as uncertainties. This dementia priority setting partnership developed, following consultation with an extensive range of stakeholders, a number of questions that needed to be answered. They were clustered together, themes were developed, and each question was then checked against an extensive evidence base of high-quality systematic reviews to see if they truly were uncertainties, were they truly unanswered questions. And from this 18-month period of work, the top 10 dementia research priorities were established, of which 5 had direct relevance to care homes. And you can see that these are to do with independence, building design, managing challenging behaviours, caring for people with advanced dementia, and also improving the standard of care. And I want to say something very briefly about those two, challenging behaviours and improving the standard of care. Bupa has approximately responsibility for 24,000 people who are living with dementia in 4 countries. From 2015, we'll also have a 5th as we start to engage in dementia care in Poland. A huge responsibility, but a great opportunity to drive forward extraordinary good care. And I just want to pick up on 2 aspects that I'm not going to say any more about person-centered care because that has been eloquently expressed by Dawn Brooker. We call our approach person-first dementia second to emphasize this is person-centered in practice. If we look at antipsychotic reduction, Dawn also has made reference to this. We've had a 4-year program of reducing the use of prescribed antipsychotics. It's come down from 35% of all residents with dementia to 19.5%. And that isn't just simply stopping drugs being prescribed. When we've looked at the metrics of care, what we've established is there have been no increase in adverse incidents, such as falls, distress behaviours, and that's probably because what we're doing is, as Dawn has expressed as well, is an amalgam of person-centred activity. We have training that are delivered by coaches within the care homes. They engage in behavioural and functional analyses to understand the meaning of behaviour, it's the unmet need model, and they engage in what is known as appreciative inquiry, looking at what is good rather than what is bad, and then exploring why good behaviours are happening to squeeze out the existence of bad behaviours. And so delivering psychological models within care settings seems to have a beneficial effect on the prescribing of drugs. But then we've allied this to leadership. There is a breed of specialist dementia care nurses in the United Kingdom known as Admiral nurses. There are only 130 of them. Most of them work in our National Health Service, but we've been recruiting to Bupa over the past year our own Admiral nurses. We have 6, soon there'll be 12, and they're an external layer of extraordinary capability supporting those dementia care homes. And what we've seen is that where we have these nurses who are providing special skills, specialist knowledge, but also leadership capacity, we see a greater reduction in the use of antipsychotics. You can see the bar says 19.5%, that's the general prescribed use. In those care homes that are supported by Admiral nurses, abbreviated to AN, at the start of the study that was 18.3%, just 7 months later that has declined to 12.9%. So it seems a coming together of the psychological modelling of behaviour in dementia, allied to external leadership, we will see further improvements in the prescribing and hence the quality of life of people with dementia. So we start to get a sense that it's possible in the real world of delivering care to people with advanced dementia with complex needs. We can start to see indicators that we can improve the quality of life as measured by the reduction in antipsychotics. But there are many, many more questions. I say that priority setting partnership was actually looking at what other questions need to be answered. And so what we're in the process of doing at the moment is establishing a teaching, research and innovation care environment with our partners at the University of Bradford. It's not a care home, it is a care environment. We say anything other than a care home, we want to look beyond care homes. It's actually a small urban landscape that we're designing. What I say it's an ordinary street with extraordinary capability to enable people with advanced dementia to be supported, but it will be within a research-rich, scholarly environment to start to answer some of these questions that currently remain unanswered. We hope that with the development of this teaching, research and innovation care environment, we will start to drive forward and uplift the quality of care and life for people who are living with dementia in care homes. Not part of the teaching, research and innovation care environment proposal, but a study that is going to be looking at advancing the quality of life is EPIC. It's again with our partners at the University of Bradford. This is a trial, it's an RCT that Dawn has already mentioned about dementia care mapping. What we wish to establish through EPIC is to see whether dementia care mapping, which is a tool that enables staff to observe the reality of their person-centered care, maybe those staff who are taught those dementia care mapping techniques can embed person-centered care better into the culture of care delivery within the care home, rather than just passively going to training sessions and listening to what person-centered care actually is. And that's a project that hopefully we'll be reporting in 2018 as to how we might embed person-centered care in a workforce that I said may well be disengaged from much of what we've been talking about this afternoon because they are transient and maybe are not as committed as we would like them to be. So I think we've got a long way to go, but I think it's quite possible that we will be now seeing an uplift in the quality of life that is provided to people who are living with advanced dementia in care homes. Thank you.
So thanks very much, Graham. I think, again, we have time for just one question. If anyone has a question for Graham on his presentation. Yes, over here.
Adelina Comas Herrera from the London School of Economics. I was very interested that you mentioned that you made the distinction between quality of care and quality of life. I think we probably haven't heard a lot about quality of life of people with dementia today yet. And I was wondering if you could explain a bit more about how we measure it and the challenges when people are in the advanced stages.
How we measure it is a challenge. For me, it's the holy grail, because by definition, people with advanced dementia are beyond language, memory, and reasoning. So we tend to take proxy measures. But I think it is critical that we do explore quality of life as distinct from quality of care. When you look at the metrics of care delivery, it probably means that a person who's living in a care home, if you take out rest, sleep, and direct care, has 11 hours of life still remaining. What happens in those 11 hours? For me, that is the advantage of coming to live in a care home. Do you live an isolated life, understimulated in your own home, simply receiving care that addresses tasks, or do you come to a setting that provides you with the opportunity to have a life beyond care? But whether that's a quality of life that we can articulate through the person's eyes with dementia is a challenge, because as I say, they're beyond cognition.
Thank you very much indeed, Graham. Thank you. So I'd like to introduce our final speaker in this session. That's Dr. Hiroaki Kazui. And Dr. Kazui is an associate professor at the Department of Psychiatry at Osaka University Graduate School of Medicine here in Japan. Dr. Kazui.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk. Today, I will be providing an overview of our experience in developing a regional cooperative system for dementia patients at home with a collaboration notebook. To enable dementia patients to feel at ease when living at home, care specialists such as care managers, daycare specialists, day service providers, and home care workers, as well as medical professionals such as family physicians, home visiting nurses, and dementia specialists. Each play a specific role, and collaboration among all those involved in the care of the patient is essential. However, such collaboration is not necessarily a smooth process. We have developed a system to help dementia patients live at home that consists of 3 tools: a collaboration notebook, disease and severity-specific care guidebooks, and collaborative meetings. The collaboration notebook is the most important tool, with the others serving to facilitate efficient use of the notebook. We provide the collaboration notebook when the patient is diagnosed with dementia. We ask a caregiver to carry it with them whenever the patient goes to see the family physician, a care facility, or a dementia specialized hospital. Our collaboration notebook consists of 2 parts. The first part summarizes information on the diagnosis, results of examinations, and treatment for the specific patient. The second part is for sharing information. Important information that needs to be shared among all those involved is written on a yellow-colored page, so it can be seen at a quick glance. The name and occupation of the person writing the notes are written in the upper left section. In the section below, any items that need to be asked or discussed are written. Persons to whom a question or information is directed are specified in the upper right section. The person specified replies to a question in the lower right section. This yellow page is important, and all persons involved in the care of the patient are required to read these notes. Those who read the notes must sign and date the section below. A specific example of how this sheet is used is when a family physician writes with everyone as a target of notification that I would prescribe the medication for delusions. Please observe the patient for any dizziness or drowsiness. During the time each person spent with the patient's status, such as the presence or absence of dizziness or drowsiness, is recorded. This allows the family physician to know if, when, and where any adverse reaction have occurred. We created 10 kinds of disease and severity-specific care guidebooks. Each kind of guidebook consists a small number of pages and focuses on the common types of behavioral and psychological symptoms and how to cope with a BPSD in a specific stage of a particular disease. The purpose of these guidebooks is to help facilitate care for the patient by recognizing mild BPSD and allowing appropriate measures to prevent any worsening of BPSD. I would now like to explain how our regional cooperative system has been implemented. We start by distributing guidebooks to regional medical facilities and care facilities. Any patient suspected of having dementia is accompanied by a caregiver to visit a dementia specialist. If dementia is diagnosed, the severity is assessed, and the appropriate disease and severity-specific guidebook is given to the family. A collaboration notebook is also prepared and given to the family. Each patient then receives care services while continuing to see the family physician with a collaboration notebook afterward. Trial implementation of this system was conducted between February and July 2011 in the region near Osaka University Hospital. Participants included 59 dementia patients and their family caregivers, family physicians, care managers, and care facilities. Collaborative meetings were held once monthly, and about 100 persons attended each meeting. Ways, means, and strategies for effectively using the notes were discussed among all participants. These are the results of a survey among the family after trial implementation during this 6-month period. Results were assessed for each of the 3 tools. Results were rated the highest for the collaboration notebook, indicated by green. The benefits included learning to manage BPSD, finding ways to cope independently, ease of consulting with care managers and facilities, improved cooperation between medical staff and care workers, and ease of consulting with family physicians. Some assessments were performed before and after the implementation. These results indicated that the knowledge of family caregivers about dementia and caregiving increased, the family physician's understanding of the patient condition improved, and the burden on family caregivers was reduced after the trial implementation. We also assessed whether using the notebooks was a burden. In this pie chart, the blue and light blue represent what we believe to be good results. About 3/4 of family caregivers and family physicians did not respond that writing notes was burdensome. In addition, about 90% of family caregivers did not feel that carrying the notebooks to care facilities and family physicians was burdensome. About 95% of both family caregivers and family physicians responded that using the notebooks was useful. Next, beginning in 2013, the regional cooperative system was introduced throughout Kawanishi City, which has a population of about 160,000, including 25% elderly individuals, and is located in Hyogo Prefecture. The collaboration notebook was revised and called the Kawanishi City Collaboration Notebook, or Tsunagari Note in Japanese. In Kawanishi City, the criteria for selecting candidates for distributing of the Tsunagari notes were residence in Kawanishi City and support required level of 2 or more according to the Japanese long-term insurance system, care insurance system. A total of 3,073 persons meeting these criteria were extracted from the city government database before starting the project. Note use started on February 1st, 2013. By April 18th, the number of users was 463. During the 6 months after the project launch, collaborative meetings were held 4 times each month, followed by once a month. Many lectures by dementia specialists and discussion about how to use the note more effectively have continued up to the present time. This is the last slide. About 6 months ago, we also began a series of lectures with a dementia care guidebook during collaborative meetings. In addition, for those unable to attend the collaborative meetings, we have also organized an e-learning program. We are continually searching for ways and means to more effectively use the notes and to support dementia patients living at home. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Kazui. Again, we have time for just one question. Somebody has something for Dr. Kazui? Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. Am I on? Yes. You're using e-learning for some of the books, but I'm interested in whether you have thought about... No, I'm not on. I knew somebody would help me. There you go. I wonder whether you have thought about using the notebook on an iPad, and whether you discarded that idea or not.
Thank you very much for your question. I'd like to answer your question correctly, so I want to tell in Japanese. Okay. Yes.
Thank you very much for your question. Using iPad and such electronic equipment, I thought about it. In Japan, going forward, in the future, we think it's possible for us to use such equipment. However, when we initiated this program, we had a questionnaire, and at that time, elderly people were not really using personal computers, so that's why we used this notebook instead.
Indeed, Dr. Kazui. Thank you. Now, I'm aware that we're already into our break time, but we have an opportunity for some brief summary comments from Dr. Hashchinsky before we close.
There was an American catcher called Yogi Berra who said, when you come to the fork in the road, take both. And I think that's the situation we're in. There is a long road both for prevention and for care. The long road is we have to discover scientifically the causes and the treatment of the different conditions that lead to dementia. In terms of care, it's going to be very diverse. In China, from a one-child policy to Africa with many children. However, both have shortcuts. The shortcut for prevention is the vascular component. And now there are 4 European countries that have shown that, and 1 America, United States, and 3 European countries, where the incidence of dementia seems to be decreasing. These are also the countries where stroke has decreased in half in the past 20 years. Is this coincidence? I think not. So that makes me optimistic that treating the vascular component can give us a shortcut. In terms of care, I have the impression that one measure that will be very effective is the community level efforts. And the reason I say that is that it has the 3 ingredients that most centenarians share: a sense of purpose, physical activity, and a rich social environment. So I think that if we're to stem the tsunami of dementia, we have to use new approaches. And if we do, I think we can do much better.
Okay. So thanks very much indeed, Dr. Hashchinsky. So to conclude very briefly, this has been a fascinating session. And I hope that there are some take-home points and some provoking thoughts that we can have to inform our future activities. I think the first thing that hopefully is beginning now to be more broadly accepted is that dementia is a preventable condition. And I think in the culture of nihilism that has previously surrounded dementia, in particular that it's been seen just as a normal part of aging and that there's nothing that we can do, accepting it as a preventable condition and understanding what it is that we can do is going to be very important. I think some of that nihilism that has come from the past has been around an insistence that we have evidence from randomized controlled trials to inform prevention strategies. We never had evidence from a randomized controlled trial to support smoking cessation as a strategy for preventing lung cancer. It came from epidemiology. We're never going to get evidence that treating midlife hypertension is a successful preventive strategy in order to prevent dementia, but the epidemiology suggests that very, very strongly. So I think the evidence is already strong enough to inform action. And I think we've heard a lot today about what I would term secondary or tertiary prevention. That is preventive treatment. And we've heard about different possible target groups, people with cerebrovascular risk factors or strokes, as Dr. Shinsky was talking about, people with the geriatric syndrome of frailty, as Dr. Chen was talking about from Taiwan. And we've also heard about MCI as being a possible treatment prevention group. And clearly here, there is the possibility to conduct randomized controlled trials on people in late life already to see if there's a possibility to actually change their aging trajectories and prevent transition into dementia. And it's extremely encouraging that there are more of those trials that are taking place. I think the other prevention message that we need to get across is that it's never too early to start prevention activities. It's also never too late. I think today's session has covered the it's never too late quite extensively, but it's never too early is a tricky one, because I think how we use this message that your cardiovascular risk determines your risk of developing dementia in late life in order to change the lifestyles and behaviors of younger people is as yet completely uncharted territory. And a lot of that is actually outside the health sector. These are multi-sectoral activities that need to address things like pollution, as we heard from Dr. Hashinsky, the extent to which cityscapes are amenable to people taking exercise, education, and the way that that's delivered to populations, particularly in low and middle income countries. So these are all very important questions, but as yet they've been relatively little addressed. We've heard a lot about the important issues relating to improving the quality of care. We also need to, I think about the coverage of care. That's an important issue for high-income countries. It's a very important issue for low and middle-income countries. And as far as the prevention angle is concerned, I do really hope that policymakers and heads of government who are worried about finances do not get away with the idea that through these prevention strategies, the future global epidemic of dementia is not going to happen. So the issue of how people access care and the quality of that care that people receive is still going to be an important issue, at least for the next generation of people with dementia. Thanks very much indeed.
座長の先生、演者の先生方、ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much, Chairman, and also the speakers. Thank you very much. Now we'd like to take a 20 minutes break. To the left, in the back of the room, we have some coffee and refreshments ready, so please enjoy. Please help yourself. This room is going to be session 4. This room is going to be session 4, Enhance Awareness and Education in the Society. Auditorium, session 3, Living Well with Dementia in the Community. There is no seating arrangement. Thank you very much. Well, you don't have to go to the sessions you already applied for, but you can enjoy both sessions. Please make sure to put your receiver on your seat as you go out. This hall is part of the membership club, so please refrain from eating and drinking outside of room. Thank you very much. The next session starts at 3:30. Thank you.